At 2:57 a.m., the ceiling started pacing again. Not the normal settling creak of an old building, not the occasional footfall of someone getting water. This was a deliberate back-and-forth rhythm, like the upstairs tenant had nowhere to put the energy in his body except into the floor above hers. Naomi Johnson stared at the shadowed corner of her studio apartment and waited for it to stop. Step, step. Pause. Step, step. She'd been in Seoul long enough to know the building wasn't going to collapse. The place was modest, older, tucked into a street that still smelled faintly of fried dumplings during the day and damp pavement at night. It was solid concrete and stubbornness, exactly the kind of structure that outlived trends and glass towers. But her sleep was not as durable. A scrape sounded overhead, like something heavy dragged across the floor. Naomi sat up slowly, hair wrapped, t-shirt hanging off one shoulder. She'd promised herself she wouldn't be that foreign tenant who complained about everything. She was here on a year-long fellowship. She could handle a little city noise. This was not city noise. This was someone living like a threat. Another scrape. Then a low thud. She checked her phone. 3:02 a.m. In 5 hours she'd be in a conservation lab under bright lights, steadying her hands over a fractured lacquer panel that belonged to a century that didn't forgive mistakes. If she went in exhausted, she'd ruin work she'd waited years to touch. She pushed her feet into the pink bunny slippers her sister mailed as a joke, grabbed her key, and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel suspicious. A dim yellow bulb buzzed in its fixture. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's rice cooker clicked off, and the faint smell of garlic lingered like someone had cooked late. Apartment 502. Naomi knocked once, hard. The footsteps stopped immediately. She waited, counted to 3, knocked again. The door opened on the second knock, slow and controlled, as if whoever was behind it had been standing there already. He filled the doorway, not in a dramatic way, in a matter-of-fact, physically undeniable way. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair slightly tousled like he'd run his hand through it too many times. His shirt was partially unbuttoned, the collar open. The edge of a tattoo disappeared beneath clean fabric at his throat. Nothing flashy, just the suggestion of something permanent. His face was calm, unreadable. Not sleepy, not surprised. His eyes landed on hers like he'd already decided what she was. Yes? His English was precise, with an accent that didn't soften the edges. Naomi squared her shoulders. "I'm your downstairs neighbor." He didn't blink. I know. That was unsettling. She held on to irritation like a lifeline. "You've been pacing for an hour, and dragging something heavy across the floor. It's 3 a.m. A beat." He looked past her down the hallway, quick, subtle, like a man checking exits without moving his head. Then he looked back at her. "I wasn't aware it was loud." The lie was smooth, the delivery even smoother. "It's loud," she said, voice flat. "It sounds like you're moving furniture, or..." She stopped herself before she said something stupid like bodies, because that was ridiculous. He stepped back 1 inch, just enough to reach into the apartment. When he returned, he held a folded stack of cash between 2 fingers. For the inconvenience. Naomi stared at it, then she stared at him. "I didn't come here for money." His expression didn't change. "It's the quickest solution." "No." She lifted her chin. "The quickest solution is you keeping it down." Silence stretched. He watched her like she was a variable he hadn't planned for. Behind him, a shadow moved. A second man, barely visible, dressed in dark clothing that looked too sharp for a late-night hangout. The shadow disappeared. Her heart hit her ribs hard enough to hurt. She lay still, listening. Silence. Then the faintest sound of a door opening upstairs. Her upstairs neighbor's door, not the building's main one. A shuffle. A low, sharp command she couldn't make out. Deeper into the apartment without making a sound. Naomi's irritation dimmed. "Not gone, just redirected." "You have people over," she said carefully. "Yes, 1 word. No explanation." She did not like that. "I'm not asking you what you're doing," she said. "I don't care. I just need sleep." He stepped slightly forward, enough to fill the doorway more completely, blocking her view of the interior. It wasn't aggressive, it was tactical. "It won't happen again," he said. His eyes didn't warm. His tone didn't soften. It was a statement, not an apology. Naomi felt a prickle at the base of her neck. "Okay," she said, because continuing this conversation felt like pressing her palm to a hot stovetop to test whether it was really hot. She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel him watching her anyway. Inside her apartment, she locked the door and leaned against it, heart beating a little faster than it should have for a noise complaint. Upstairs, the pacing stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was immediate, total, and somehow worse than the noise, like he'd turned it off because he could. Naomi told herself to go back to bed. She tried, but her body had shifted into a different kind of alertness now, the kind that made you listen for details you couldn't name. Minutes passed. Then, soft, muted voices overhead, not loud, not clear. The cadence of men speaking low, controlled. Something scraped again, quieter this time, as if whoever was moving something had learned how to do it without being heard. She pulled the blanket up to her chest and stared at the ceiling. No, not her problem. She closed her eyes. A dull thud sounded above her, followed by a pause, then another, like someone had fallen to their knees. Naomi's eyes snapped open. And then, a sound like someone choking back a groan. Naomi sat up. She told herself not to move, told herself not to be stupid, told herself that she was a grown woman in a foreign city, and curiosity was how people ended up on the news. But her body moved before her logic could stop it. She slipped into the hallway, barefoot now, bunny slippers abandoned, like they suddenly didn't fit the moment. The corridor was darker, quieter. The building felt like it was holding its breath. Apartment 502. The door was not closed all the way, just barely open. A thin wedge of darkness. Naomi's stomach tightened. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But she stepped closer anyway. And through that narrow opening she saw a man on the floor, not sleeping, not drunk, kneeling, hands pulled behind him, blood on the tile. And standing over him, calm as stone, was the man she'd just yelled at. Kang Tae-yoon. He turned his head slightly, not startled, not surprised, as if he'd been expecting her to look. His eyes met hers through the crack in the door. And in that moment Naomi understood something with absolute clarity. This was not a rude neighbor. This was something else. Tae-yoon lifted his hand, one small motion, a command. The suited shadow moved in the darkness, and the door began to open wider. Slow, controlled, deliberate. Naomi didn't step back fast enough. She didn't step forward either. Her body locked in that thin space between instinct and pride, the place where you decide whether you are the kind of person who turns and runs, or the kind who stays long enough to understand what is happening. Kang Tae-yoon's gaze held hers through the widening gap. No surprise, no panic, no warning, just a calm assessment, like he was reading her spine for weakness. Behind him, the kneeling man's head lifted slightly, a swollen lip, one eye already bruising shut. Blood dotted the tile in front of him like careless paint. Naomi's stomach tightened hard. This was real. Not a bad vibe. Not a rich guy with weird hours. Not a misunderstanding. She should have left. She knew it. The part of her that handled fragile objects for a living, objects that shattered if you breathed wrong, was screaming at her to preserve herself the same way. But Tae-yoon lifted his hand again, not at her. At the suited shadow in the back of the apartment. The shadow stopped moving instantly. The apartment went perfectly still. Tae-yoon's voice came low. "Come in." Naomi's mouth went dry. "No." Tae-yoon didn't blink. "You already saw." That was the thing about him. He didn't argue in circles. He didn't soften the blow. He stated reality like it was law. Naomi swallowed. "I'm leaving." She took one step backward. The kneeling man's eyes flicked toward her. Just once. Quick, sharp, memorizing. That small movement hit Naomi like a cold slap. It wasn't Tae-yoon she needed to worry about in that second. It was the man on the floor, because a man with nothing to lose had reasons to remember faces. Tae-yoon noticed the flicker. His gaze shifted to the kneeling man for a fraction of a second. The air changed, not louder, not angrier, heavier. "Eyes down," Tae-yoon said. The kneeling man obeyed immediately, lowering his gaze to the blood on the tile. Tae-yoon turned back to Naomi. His voice stayed even. "Go downstairs, lock your door." Naomi blinked. "That's it?" "That's it. No threat, no apology, no reassurance, just instruction." She should have run. But she heard herself say, too quiet, "What is this?" Tae-yoon's eyes didn't soften. "Not your concern. That's hard to accept when it's bleeding in my hallway," she replied, then hated herself for giving him anything resembling attitude. Tae-yoon stared at her for a long beat. Then he said, "You wanted quiet." The line landed like a knife. Naomi's throat tightened. "Go," he repeated. She backed away, step by step, never turning her back until the door began closing. It shut without a slam, without drama, Just a controlled seal, like he could close worlds with his fingertips. Naomi walked downstairs on legs that did not feel attached to her body. She locked her door, turned the deadbolt, then added the chain she hadn't used once since moving in. Her palms were damp, her heart wouldn't slow. She pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. No shouting, no chaos, no gunshots. Just the building settling into a silence that didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt supervised. She forced herself back into bed and lay rigid under the blanket, staring at the ceiling like it might confess something. When she finally drifted off, it was shallow and sharp-edged. The next morning, she went to work anyway. She did not tell her supervisor, because what exactly would she say? "Hello, I think my upstairs neighbor is violently interrogating men in his apartment." She did not tell her friend from the fellowship either. She didn't want concern or advice or horror. She wanted facts, and she didn't have any. So she restored her lacquer panel with hands that were steadier than she felt, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and pretending the world was still simple. By late afternoon, the unease had dulled into something almost manageable. Until her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Are you home?" Naomi stopped in the middle of the lab, gloves on, brush hovering above a delicate fracture line. Another message followed immediately. "Don't go straight upstairs. Wait outside." She stared at the screen until her eyes burned, then she typed the only response that didn't feel like surrender. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then, Tayoon. Her pulse jumped. The rational part of her brain tried to protest. She didn't give him her number. He shouldn't have. The calmness of that answer made her blood run colder. She turned toward the stairwell. Another message appeared. "Don't go upstairs." Naomi's mouth went dry. "So what do I do?" she whispered, but she didn't send the text. Because the lobby door opened. The 2 men stepped inside. Not rushing, not loud, like they belonged there. Naomi backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. She looked for an exit. The back door, the stairwell, anything. The taller man spoke first, English with a flat accent. Naomi Johnson, hearing her name out loud, said like a confirmed detail, snapped the last illusion out of her mind. She didn't answer. The other man smiled faintly. "We need to ask you about something you saw." Naomi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't know who you are." The taller man took 1 step forward. "You were in apartment 502. Naomi swallowed. "No." The smile faded. "Don't lie." The smarter part corrected it instantly. "Of course he has it." She swallowed and typed, "Why?" His reply came quickly. "Go out the front. Don't use the elevator." Naomi's fingers went cold. She set down the brush with exaggerated care, stripped her gloves, and told her supervisor she was leaving early for a building issue. Her voice sounded normal. That terrified her more than anything. Outside, the sun was already sinking behind the rows of buildings. Seoul's winter light made everything look crisp and metallic. People moved around her with shopping bags and coffee cups and normal lives. She stood near the entrance of her building, pretending to scroll while her eyes tracked every face that slowed near the door. She didn't see Taeyoon. Then she saw them. 2 men near the corner, too still, too watchful, not doing anything but looking like they were waiting for something to happen. And then one of them turned his head slightly, looked directly at her. Naomi's stomach dropped. He didn't smile, he didn't approach. He simply lifted his phone, as if he'd just confirmed something. Naomi's body moved before her brain finished the thought. She stepped backward, deeper into the small lobby. Her breath tightened, her fingers clenched around her own phone until it hurt. Her screen lit again. "Stay where you are." Her chest rose and fell too quickly. She typed, "There are men outside. 3 dots. I know." Her eyes flicked to the stairwell again. The taller man followed her gaze and moved, just slightly, blocking it. That tiny shift told her everything. They'd thought about this. They weren't making it up as they went. Naomi's lungs tightened. "I didn't see anything that matters." The second man's eyes narrowed. "You saw our friend." "Friend." "So the kneeling man." Her stomach turned. "You saw his face," the man continued softly. "He saw yours." Naomi's mind scrambled, searching for something. Logic, leverage, anything. "If he's your friend, why was he bleeding on the floor?" The taller man's gaze sharpened. "You ask too many questions." And then he reached for her. In that instant, time slowed in the way it only does when something irreversible is about to happen. His hand closed around her wrist. Naomi's body reacted with a burst of panic. She pulled back, twisting, trying to break free. His grip tightened. The second man stepped closer. Naomi opened her mouth to scream. A sound like thunder snapped through the lobby. The glass door shuddered. The taller man released her instantly and jerked around. 2 shots. Fast, controlled, not sprayed, not wild, precise. The taller man staggered backward like his legs had stopped receiving messages. The second man spun, another shot. He hit the floor hard. The lobby went dead silent. Naomi stood frozen, her wrist still burning where he grabbed her. Her mind couldn't catch up fast enough to name what had just happened. Then she heard footsteps. Not pacing, approaching. Taeyoon entered the lobby like he had all the time in the world. Dark coat, no visible weapon, calm face, cold eyes. 2 men in suits followed him, moving with practiced efficiency, checking corners, scanning hallways. One stepped around the fallen bodies as if stepping over trash. Naomi's throat closed. Taeyoon's gaze landed on her wrist. He moved toward her, close enough that she smelled clean smoke and something expensive. Soap, leather, winter air. His hand came up. Naomi flinched before she could stop herself. Taeyoon paused, not offended, not surprised. Then he took her wrist gently, but firmly, and turned it, inspecting the red mark left by the grip. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice didn't rise. It didn't soften. But it was the first time he asked her a question that wasn't an order. Naomi swallowed. "No." Taeyoon's thumb brushed once over the mark. A simple touch. The air shifted anyway. He released her wrist and turned to his men. "She's coming with me." One of the men hesitated, not because he disagreed, but because he was waiting for confirmation of something. "Boss." Taeyoon cut him off with a glance. The man went silent immediately. Taeyoon's gaze returned to Naomi. "You don't go upstairs." Naomi's voice scraped out. "My things, you'll get them. I have my passport, you'll get it." The way he said it made her understand. This wasn't negotiation, this was containment. Naomi forced a breath into her lungs, forced her mind into the present. "Those men, they won't bother you again," Taeyoon said. She stared at the bodies on the floor. "That's a bold promise." Taeyoon looked down at the dead men like they were a solved equation. "They can't." Naomi's stomach churned. She didn't want to vomit, she didn't want to cry, she wanted to run. But the exit was blocked by reality. She lifted her chin. "So you're kidnapping me." Taeyoon's gaze sharpened by half a degree. "If you want a word, call it protection. I didn't ask for your protection." Taeyoon stepped closer. Too close. His voice dropped slightly, the coldness turning almost intimate. "You don't get to ask when you're already a target." Naomi's throat tightened. That was the moment her defiance recalibrated. Not because she was scared of him, because she was smart enough to see the math. Kneeling man, bruised face, eyes memorizing hers. 2 men in the lobby calling her name like it was a confirmed detail. This wasn't going to fade if she stayed here. She took a slow breath. "Where are you taking me?" Taeyoon didn't answer directly. "You will do what I say until this is finished." Naomi forced her voice steady. "And how long does that take?" Taeyoon's eyes held hers without mercy. "As long as it takes." Behind him, one of his men spoke quietly into an earpiece. Another picked up a fallen phone from one of the attackers and slid it into a pocket. Taeyoon glanced at Naomi again. "Go." Naomi moved, not because she was obedient, because she had just watched 2 men die in front of her in under 5 seconds, and she wasn't foolish enough to pretend she could handle it herself with pride. Taeyoon's men formed a loose shield around her as they crossed the street to a black car that looked too expensive for this neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, it was purposeful. The door opened before she reached it. Naomi hesitated. Taeyoon's hand came to the small of her back, not pushing, guiding, claiming. Her skin heated under the pressure. She slid into the car. Taeyoon followed, coat brushing her knee. He didn't look at her as he shut the door. He spoke quietly into his phone, Korean words clipped and cold. She caught only fragments, not enough to repeat, enough to understand the tone. The car slowed. A luxury high-rise rose ahead, its lobby glowing like a private world. Security moved with quiet precision at the entrance. No visible chaos, no drama, just money and control pretending to be peace. The car entered an underground garage. A private elevator waited. Taeyoon stepped out first. His men moved with him, scanning. When he looked at Naomi, his gaze didn't ask, it instructed. She stepped out. The elevator doors opened without a key card. Inside, the walls were dark polished metal, the lighting soft and expensive. Taeyoon pressed a floor number that wasn't labeled. The doors shut. Naomi's pulse beat in her throat as the elevator rose. Higher, higher. It stopped. The doors opened on a space that didn't feel like an apartment. It felt like an empire. Glass walls. City lights spread below like a map, clean lines, quiet luxury. The air itself seemed filtered. 2 men in suits waited inside, guards, not staff. They lowered their gaze when Taeyun entered. He didn't introduce Naomi. He didn't soften the moment for her. He simply said, cold and absolute, "She stays on my level." Naomi's stomach dropped, not from fear, from the realization of what that sentence meant in his world. Taeyun glanced at her once, brief, unreadable. Then he turned away as if the decision had been made long before she arrived. "Welcome," he said, voice flat, "to the only place you're safe." And the doors behind her sealed shut with a sound that felt final. The penthouse was quiet in a way Naomi had never experienced. Not the quiet of an empty apartment, not the quiet of a late-night museum wing. This was curated quiet, sound absorbed by expensive materials, movement controlled by systems she couldn't see, silence enforced by men who stood like statues at the edge of the room, and pretended they weren't listening. She stepped forward slowly, her sneakers making almost no sound on the polished floor. Glass walls wrapped the space, turning Seoul into an ocean of lights below. The efficiency, control, immediate cleanup. He ended the call and looked forward. Naomi stared at him. "Who were they?" Taeyun's jaw flexed once. "They were sent to see what you know." "I don't know anything," she said. Taeyun's eyes shifted to her, flat, steady. "You know what you saw." Naomi's breath caught. "The man on your floor." Taeyun didn't deny it. "He survived?" she asked, because it was the only explanation for this. Taeyun's silence was answer enough. The car moved, pulling away from the modest building as if cutting a thread. Naomi looked out the window as her neighborhood blurred past. Small shops, streetlights, ordinary people. Then the city began to change. Roads widened, buildings rose, glass and steel climbed into the sky like ambition. Taeyun sat beside her, still as stone. His presence filled the car more than his body should have been able to. Naomi whispered, mostly to herself, "This is insane." Taeyun finally spoke. "You wanted quiet." She turned her head sharply. "Don't..." He cut her off with his calm. "You knocked on the wrong door." Naomi swallowed, anger flaring, then dying under the memory of gunshots. City looked beautiful from up here, untouchable, like none of the violence that happened in narrow hallways could reach this altitude. But the elevator doors had sealed behind her like a verdict, and the red mark on her wrist reminded her that safety came with conditions. Kang Taeyun shrugged out of his coat and handed it to one of the men without looking. He didn't introduce her. He didn't explain her presence. His control didn't require justification. He turned his attention back to Naomi. "You'll stay here tonight." She kept her voice even. "And if I don't?" Taeyun's expression didn't change. "Then you'll die downstairs." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even harsh. It was a fact delivered like a weather report. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She forced her breathing to stay slow. If she let herself spiral, she'd become the thing she refused to be. Panicked, loud, a problem. She glanced toward the guards, then back to Taeyun. "My phone. You have it. My passport." A pause. A flicker in his eyes, recognition of a practical mind. "I'll send someone for it," he said. "And my work bag." He looked at her like she'd asked for something frivolous. "You're not going to work tomorrow." Naomi's jaw tightened. "I can't just disappear." "You can," he replied. And that was the first time she understood the true scale of the man standing in front of her. Not the gunshots, not the blood, the ease with which he could erase normal life. "Why were you in that building?" Taeyun drank his water, set the glass down with quiet precision. "It was convenient." "Convenient," she repeated, incredulous. "Men died in the lobby." "That's why it was convenient," he said. Naomi's breath caught. "That makes no sense." "It does," Taeyun replied, "when I need something done without attention." Naomi stared at him, trying to reconcile the calmness with the reality. "The man I saw, the one on the floor. He survived?" A pause. Taeyun's eyes held hers. "Yes, and he told them about me. He told them you were there." Naomi felt cold spread across her skin. "So they came because they don't know what you heard," Taeyun finished. "They don't know what you'll say. And they don't know if you belong to me." The last words hit differently. Not romantic, not yet, territorial. Naomi's throat tightened. "Do I?" Taeyun stepped closer, not quickly, not aggressively, but enough to change the air between them. "You're alive," he said. "That's what you belong to." Naomi's pulse jumped. She hated her body noticed him. His height, the quiet power in his stillness, the way his presence filled the space without effort. Naomi swallowed. "Do I get a room?" Taeyun motioned once. A woman appeared from a hallway, quiet, professional, expression blank in the way staff in powerful houses learn to be. "This way," the woman said. Naomi followed because she had no better option. The guest room was minimal but luxurious, low bed, clean lines, a view of the river in the distance. A stack of fresh clothes appeared on the chair, soft, dark, clearly chosen by someone who knew what fit, a woman, and what might make her feel less exposed. Naomi stopped in the doorway. "I didn't ask for this." The staff woman didn't react. "If you need anything, press the button." A small panel by the bed glowed faintly. Then the woman left. The door didn't lock from the outside. That was intentional. Taeyun wasn't trying to trap her with a key. He was trapping her with reality. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands until they stopped shaking. She didn't sleep. Not at first. She tried, because exhaustion was heavy in her bones. But every time her eyes closed, she saw the lobby again. 2 bodies hitting the floor. The way Taeyun's voice didn't change as the world shifted into violence around him. Eventually, she got up and padded barefoot toward the kitchen, following the soft glow of under-cabinet lighting. She found him there. Taeyun stood at the counter with a glass of water, sleeves rolled up, the tattoo at his wrist visible now. Clean lines, deliberate geometry. A phone lay on the counter beside him. The screen was dark, but Naomi could feel the weight of it, the unseen network it connected him to. He didn't turn when she entered. He didn't startle. He simply spoke. "You should sleep." Naomi stopped a few feet away. "I'm trying." Taeyun finally looked at her, cold, unreadable. But his gaze landed on her face like a hand. Naomi crossed her arms, more for anchoring than defiance. She hated that attraction could exist in the same world as blood on tile. She forced her voice steady. "What happens now?" Taeyun's gaze moved over her face, lingering half a second too long on her mouth. Then he looked away as if to prove he could. "I end this," he said. Naomi's skin warmed under her own anger and fear. "And I just sit here?" Taeyun's eyes cut back to hers. "Yes. No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness. "I'm not going to be some hidden thing in your tower while you decide everything around me." Silence. The guards at the far edge of the room shifted, subtle as shadows. Naomi ignored them. Taeyun watched her, cold, unreadable, but something beneath it sharpened. Recognition. "You want to understand," he said. "I want to survive," Naomi replied, "and I'd like to do it with my eyes open." A long beat. Then Taeyun nodded once. "You'll sit in one meeting." Naomi's breath caught. "What?" "You'll listen," he continued. "You won't speak unless I ask." Her chin lifted. "I don't take well to being told." Taeyun's gaze held hers like steel. "You take well to living." Naomi swallowed. The heat in her chest didn't fade, but it changed direction. Practicality, not rebellion. "Fine," she said. "One meeting." Taeyun turned away, ending it. But Naomi caught the smallest shift in the set of his jaw, like he'd made a decision he didn't make lightly. She didn't know yet whether to be flattered or terrified. The meeting wouldn't happen for another 4 weeks. The first week inside Taeyun's penthouse felt like living inside a held breath. Naomi stayed mostly in the guest wing, moving carefully, aware of unseen eyes and the quiet choreography of men who adjusted their positions without looking at her directly. Meals arrived on schedule. Doors opened before she reached them. The city glittered beyond the glass, close enough to touch and impossibly far. Taeyun did not hover. He also did not disappear. Some nights she would find him standing near the windows long after midnight, jacket off, phone in hand, speaking in a voice so low she could never catch more than fragments. He never told her to return to her room. He simply existed in the same space, as if proximity was enough. By the second week, she refused to stay hidden. "I have a fellowship," she told him one morning across the long dining table. "I can't vanish for months." Taeyun didn't look up from his coffee. "You can. I won't." Silence stretched between them, not angry, evaluating. 3 days later, a car began waiting downstairs every morning. No announcement, no negotiation. An adjustment. Returning to the museum felt surreal. The quiet hum of conservation labs, the smell of lacquer and solvent, the careful conversations about history and preservation. And yet, when she exited at dusk, she noticed it. The same black sedan parked half a block away 2 evenings in a row. The driver never stepped out, never approached. But he was there. When she mentioned it casually at dinner, Taeyun didn't react visibly. He only asked, "License plate?" She gave it. The next evening the sedan didn't return. He didn't tell her what he'd done. She didn't ask. By the 3rd week, the penthouse no longer felt like a holding cell. It felt inhabited. She stopped eating alone. They began sharing dinner without ceremony, sometimes in silence, sometimes with small exchanges that felt strangely intimate. He preferred his tea without sugar. She discovered that by watching, not asking. He removed his jacket when he was tired, not when he arrived. She began leaving space for it on the back of the nearest chair. The first time she laughed, really laughed, was while telling a story from the museum about a mislabeled artifact. Tae-yoon went still. He didn't smile, but he watched her like the sound was unexpected, valuable. He began sitting longer after finishing his meals. Not speaking, just staying. Security footage occasionally flickered across screens in his office. Routes, buildings, faces she didn't recognize. Once she walked in as an image froze briefly on the museum's exterior. Tae-yoon closed the screen before she could study it. "They're still watching," she said quietly. "Yes, you didn't tell me. I don't tell you everything." She held his gaze. "You don't have to." That was the first time he looked at her like she wasn't simply under his protection, like she was choosing to remain there. The fourth week shifted something subtle but undeniable. The distance between them thinned. He stopped assigning guards to follow her inside the museum. They remained outside instead. He began walking with her personally at night, not because she asked, because he wanted to. One evening, the power flickered during a storm. The lights dimmed, then steadied. Naomi stood in the kitchen, candlelight reflecting faintly in the glass walls. "Does the Empire survive a thunderstorm?" she asked dryly. Tae-yoon's mouth almost curved. Barely. The answer startled a small smile out of her. She shook her head. "You're impossible, and you're still here," he replied. The air between them shifted. "Not charged like before." Deeper. She stepped closer. "You don't have to pretend you don't care," she said quietly. Tae-yoon's gaze sharpened. "I don't pretend. You do," she insisted, softer now. "You just do it silently." Silence. Then he closed the distance between them, slowly, deliberately, not cornering, approaching. His hand came to rest lightly at her waist, as if testing whether she would pull away. She didn't. His thumb brushed once against the fabric at her side. "Naomi," he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, less like a variable, more like a decision. She lifted her chin. "You're not afraid of me," he observed. "I am," she admitted. That honesty made something flicker in his eyes. "But I'm not running." The storm rattled faintly against the glass. Tae-yoon lowered his forehead to hers, breath warm against her skin. "You don't understand what that means yet." "Then show me," she whispered. He hesitated, only once. Then he kissed her, not rushed, not claiming, measured, like a man who understood that once he crossed that line, there would be no returning to indifference. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The city glowed beneath them. And for the first time since she knocked on his door at 3 a.m, the distance between danger and desire disappeared entirely. 4 weeks later, Tae-yoon finally called her into the darker wing of the penthouse. The meeting room was separated by a sliding door that opened silently. A long table, screens on the wall, men seated in suits, sharp, still, faces carved into blank professionalism. When Tae-yoon entered, they all stood. Not exaggerated, reflexive. Naomi walked beside him. The air tightened. Every gaze went to her, and then, immediately, down. Not from politeness, from training. Tae-yoon didn't introduce her. He didn't explain. He simply said, "She stays." 2 words. The room accepted them. Naomi took a seat at the edge of the table, not in the center, not claiming space she hadn't earned. But she didn't shrink. Either. The meeting began. Shipping routes, security contracts, names she didn't recognize, numbers that meant territory to men like these. Naomi listened, tracking patterns the way she tracked cracks in lacquer, where stress concentrated, where weakness would spread if left untreated. A man on Tae-yoon's left spoke. "The rival group is pressing into Gangnam. They're testing your perimeter." Tae-yoon's voice was calm. "They've been testing since the building." The room went still. So they knew. They all knew. Naomi's skin tightened. Another man asked, "The woman?" Tae-yoon's gaze flicked toward him. Not angry. Just final. The man stopped mid-sentence. Naomi realized something then. Tae-yoon didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to threaten. His authority lived in the way other men cut themselves off. The meeting moved on. Then Naomi heard it, one detail that didn't fit. A mention of timing, a window, an opportunity. Her mind connected it too quickly. She spoke before she could stop herself. "They didn't come to question me 4 weeks ago." Every head turned. Silence crashed into the room. Tae-yoon's eyes shifted to her. Not soft, not amused. A question. Naomi swallowed. "They came to see if you'd expose yourself." The man on Tae-yoon's left narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" Naomi kept her voice controlled. "The first attack was small. 2 men. The point wasn't to succeed. The point was to watch your response. The second attempt will be bigger, and it won't be at the modest building. A slow breath moved through the room. Taeyoon's gaze stayed on her. He didn't correct her. He didn't silence her. That told everyone she mattered more than they expected. Taeyoon finally spoke. Where will they do it? Naomi swallowed. Somewhere they expect you to hesitate. A pause. One of the men said quietly, they'll want witnesses. Taeyoon's gaze never left her. You're coming with me tonight. Naomi's pulse kicked. Where are you taking me? You said you wanted to understand how this works. The words felt final, like something sealing shut. The event was an invitation-only private auction inside a hotel that looked like money had been poured into marble and kept warm by chandeliers. Naomi wore a black dress that didn't feel like her hair pulled back clean and elegant. It made her look like she belonged at Taeyoon's side. Taeyoon stood beside her in a dark suit, his hand at the small of her back, not gripping, not possessive in a vulgar way, anchoring, claiming without words. The room watched them, not openly, not with rude stares, with the careful attention people gave a storm cloud moving through their party. Naomi's pulse stayed steady through sheer will. She kept her face calm, her gaze forward, like she'd done this her whole life, like she wasn't a museum fellow who had been drinking instant coffee in a modest apartment weeks ago. Taeyoon leaned slightly toward her. Stay close. Naomi's lips barely moved. I don't have anywhere else to go. His eyes flicked toward her mouth for half a second, then away, cold, controlled, but there was something under it now that hadn't been there before. Possession tinged with something else. Heat. The auction began. Bids lifted. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated like perfume. Naomi tried to believe in the normalcy of it. Then she felt it. A shift in the air. A man in a suit moved behind her. Too close. Naomi's skin prickled. Her gaze flicked to the mirrored wall. In the reflection she saw a hand reaching toward her wrist. Not a gentle touch. A grab. She reacted fast, twisting. But the grip closed around her anyway. The man's voice was low. Don't move. Naomi's breath caught. Across the room Taeyoon's head turned. His eyes locked on her. Everything in him went still. Not confusion. Not surprise. Decision. He moved. Fast. The crowd didn't even fully understand what was happening before Taeyoon was there, his hand clamping around the attacker's throat. The man tried to pull a weapon. Taeyoon's knee drove into his abdomen with brutal precision. The attacker folded. Taeyoon ripped him away from Naomi like she was something sacred, and the man had desecrated it. The room froze. People stared. Some stepped back. Security hesitated. Taeyoon didn't look at them. He didn't look at the guests. He looked at Naomi. You're not hurt, he said, voice low. It wasn't a question. Naomi's throat worked. No. Taeyoon's gaze flicked to the red forming where the man had grabbed her, and in that moment the coldness in his face cracked. Not into softness. Into something darker. Rage. Controlled, but barely. He turned and hauled the attacker upright by his collar. Then he spoke, quiet enough that only those near could hear, but the authority carried. Bring him. Two of Taeyoon's men appeared as if summoned by thought, taking the attacker's arms. The crowd parted instinctively as Taeyoon walked. Naomi pulled with him, anchored at his side, his hand still at her back. They moved through the hotel's private corridor, past service doors and silent hallways, until they reached an exit that opened to a secluded terrace. The night air hit Naomi's lungs like a blade. The city stretched below. The hotel lights glowed behind them. Taeyoon's men dragged the attacker out onto the terrace. The attacker struggled. You don't get to... Taeyoon stepped forward, calm again, voice cold enough to freeze breath. Who sent you? The attacker spat blood. You know. Taeyoon's gaze didn't change. Say his name. The attacker laughed, a broken sound. Kang Taeyoon, the great protector. The words were meant to mock. Instead, Taeyoon's jaw tightened. He looked at Naomi. Not to ask permission, to make sure she was watching, that she understood what the world did when it tried to take her. Then he turned back and said, Bring the leader. Naomi's breath caught. What? The men moved immediately, one speaking into an earpiece. Seconds later, another door opened, and two more men dragged someone out. This one wasn't a foot soldier, well-dressed, face composed even in humiliation. A man who had expected violence to stay private. His eyes landed on Taeyoon. Hate flared. Then his eyes flicked to Naomi, and Naomi saw calculation, possession, a message. Taeyoon saw it too. His voice was quiet. You wanted to touch what's under my protection. The rival leader's lip curled. You made her visible. You made her a target. Taeyoon nodded once, yes, then he stepped closer. Not rushed. Not chaotic. A man walking toward a conclusion. You wanted a witness, Taeyoon continued. Now you have one. Naomi's stomach tightened hard. This was the point where fantasy met blood, where her life became a line drawn on a terrace. Taeyoon turned his head slightly toward her. Look at me. Naomi's eyes met his. His gaze was cold, but there was something under it, something raw and dangerous. A truth he didn't say out loud. He was not doing this for theater. He was doing it because someone put hands on her, and he would not allow that story to exist in his world. Taeyoon looked back at the rival leader. Tell your people, he said softly, that they don't get to reach for what stands beside me. Then he nodded once. The sound that followed was sharp and final. Naomi flinched, not from the noise but from the reality of it. The rival leader collapsed, the world tilted. Naomi's breath hitched, her body trying to respond the way it had been trained to respond, panic, retreat, denial. But she forced herself to stay still, forced herself not to run, because running would make her a child again, and she wasn't a child. Taeyoon turned to her immediately. His hand came up, cupping her jaw with a gentleness that felt almost shocking after what she'd witnessed. His thumb brushed her cheekbone once, like he was checking whether she was real. You're shaking, he said. Naomi swallowed hard. I'm fine. Taeyoon's eyes held hers. No. The honesty in that single word made her throat tighten. Naomi's voice came low. I didn't understand what standing beside you meant. Taeyoon's gaze stayed steady. You do now, a beat, and you're still here. Naomi's chest rose, fell. Her heartbeat steadied, not because she was calm, because she was choosing. I'm not blind, she said quietly. I'm not pretending that was normal. Taeyoon didn't flinch from her words. He didn't excuse it. He didn't apologize. He simply said, they would have taken you. Naomi's eyes burned. Not tears, heat, shock, anger at the world for being the kind of place where that sentence could be true. She nodded once. I know. Taeyoon's hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her there, not allowing distance. His voice dropped, intimate in a way it hadn't been before. You won't be touched again. Naomi's stomach tightened. You can't promise that. Taeyoon's gaze cut through her. Watch me. It should have terrified her. Instead, something in her responded. Something dark and alive. Because beneath the violence, beneath the control, was a terrifying kind of devotion. He wasn't offering softness. He was offering certainty. Back in the penthouse, the city felt too quiet again. Taeyoon dismissed his men with a glance. Doors closed. Distance fell away. Naomi stood in the living room, still in the black dress, still feeling the terrace wind on her skin. Her hands trembled slightly when she unclasped her bracelet. Taeyoon watched her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. Naomi lifted her chin. I didn't ask for any of this. Taeyoon stepped closer. I know. His voice was almost rough now, not loud, just edged. Naomi's throat tightened. But I'm still here. Taeyoon's gaze held hers, and for the first time his coldness thinned enough to show something underneath. Relief, dark, unspoken. Then come here, he said. Naomi moved. Not because she was trapped, because she chose to step into him. Taeyoon's hand slid to her waist, firm and steady, grounding her. He lowered his forehead to hers for a brief second, the intimacy of the gesture striking deeper than any kiss. You won't get a softer version of me, he murmured. Naomi's voice came out quiet, steady, honest. I don't want one. Taeyoon's breath hitched once, small, rare. Then he kissed her, slow, deliberate. A claim that didn't feel like ownership. It felt like surrender to something he hadn't planned for. Naomi's hands rose to his chest, fingers curling into his shirt as if she could hold herself steady through him. The danger didn't disappear. It hovered outside the glass, in the city, in the shadows of his world. But inside, with his mouth on hers and his hands anchoring her like a promise, Naomi understood something she hadn't expected when she marched upstairs in bunny slippers. Some fires didn't just burn. Some fires kept you alive. And when Taeyoon pulled back, eyes locked on hers, voice low and final, he said, You're safe here. Naomi swallowed, then answered with the only truth she could. Then don't let me go. Taeyoon's gaze darkened. I won't, he said, and the city lights below them kept shining like nothing had changed, while in the glass fortress above, everything had. Some doors shouldn't be knocked on at 3 a.m, but sometimes the wrong door leads to the right man. Thank you for listening to Neon Obsidian, where obsession is devotion and love stands beside power. If you enjoyed this story, stay with me. There's always another door waiting.